1 Corinthians chapter 14, verses 26 through 33. What then shall we say, brothers and sisters? When you come together, each of you has a hymn or a word of instruction, a revelation, a tongue or interpretation. Everything must be done so that the church may be built up. If anyone speaks in a tongue, 2 or 3 at most should speak, one at a time, and someone must interpret. If there's no interpreter, the speaker should keep quiet in the church and speak to himself and to God. 2 or 3 prophets should speak, and the others should weigh carefully what is said. And if a revelation comes to someone who is sitting down, the first speaker should stop. For you can all prophesy in turn, so that everyone may be instructed and encouraged. The spirits of prophets are subject to the control of prophets. For God is not a God of disorder, but of peace, as in all the congregations of the Lord's people. So we're coming to close to the end of 1 Corinthians chapter 14. There's one more passage left to finish up these 3 chapters that have been about rich spiritual worship. So it begins with this kind of little normal way of talking. What do we say, brothers and sisters? And then he begins to give his instructions. And this is I'm gonna underline it in red. Although it's not really a command, it's an instruction. So he's providing a guideline for worship. When you come together, each of you has a hymn, a word of instruction, a revelation, a tongue, or interpretation. Everything must be done so that the church may be built up. If anyone speaks in a tongue, 2 or 3 at most should speak at one time. All right, man. And it just keeps going. It's all instruction. 2 or 3 prophets should speak. Others should weigh what's being said. Revelation comes. Everyone can prophesy. And that's where it stops. This is all basically instruction. It's a lot of instruction. So here we go. Let's get into it. When you come together, that's the first thing to unpack. Come together. This is gathering. And so, again, we're looking at house churches. This may be happening after the Lord's Supper that they would have had together, the love feast, as they're called in other places. When you come together, you have the Lord's Supper, and then each of you has a hymn, a word of instruction, a revelation, a tongue or an interpretation, and prophecy. So there's these 6 elements that Paul puts into the worship service in the church in Corinth. And, we could ask ourselves, is this the exhaustive list? Is this how every single church service should be run? And I mean, obviously, no. The answer is no, because, where's prayer, right? And we know that we're supposed to pray when we gather together. So what Paul's providing is really a guide on the use of the spiritual gifts in the worship service, and just giving some words of instructions for particularly points where the Corinthians are having trouble. It's important to understand that the New Testament does not give us a one-size-fits-all approach to worship, okay? But we do get guidelines. And so let's look at these and see what we can get from a guideline. It begins with this. Each of you. Normally, in the New Testament, this phrase, this Greek phrase, is really referring to individuals. Each individual. If you look at your commentary, Garland would say that he's not talking about each individual as kind of more of a rhetoric flair. I think that he really does want everyone to participate, everyone to bring something in worship. And so he begins to list off the things that people could bring. A hymn. It's important to remember that with hymns, we're not talking about the songs in what we call the hymnal. Hymn is actually a Greek word, and it just means a song of praise to a deity. So the Greeks had hymns for their gods. It doesn't have to be a known song. It could be new. It could be old. It's just a song of praise to God. And so the idea here is that someone is I'm going to go to church this Sunday and I'm going to lead everyone in a familiar song. And then maybe somebody else says, and I'm going to lead everyone in this new song that I've written this week. You're bringing a song of praise. Second, a word of instruction. And this is very much what we would think of with sermon. Not the Greek gods, but they were Greek gods, sorry. A word of instruction. So The idea here is that the person has meditated on God's word, studied some element of God's truth, and is bringing a word of instruction to the group. And that's what preachers do today. A revelation. And so that means that people were praying and seeking, God, give me a revelation, a word. This does not mean it has to be new. Does not mean that it has to be new revelation. It could be the same message, but they just want something directly from the Lord. And then a tongue, which we know was babbling, right? And very common in the Corinthian church. Or an interpretation. So you don't have to bring the tongue, but you might bring the interpretation. One who can interpret the babbling. Okay, so those are the first 5. And then down here in verse 29, we have prophecy. That'll be the 6th. But before that, Paul is going to give some instruction on how to do the tongues. So kind of this first verse gets us into elements of worship. And then he begins to unpack tongues after that, particularly. Before that, he says, everything must be done so that the church may be built up. This word shows up all over this. It's often translated as edified or strengthened. And that's what he's saying is everything, every use of every spiritual gift must be done for the edification of the body. Now, again, this isn't like the text on worship because Paul doesn't even talk about worship. He doesn't say everything must be done for the glory of God, although that's obvious because it's worship. So true worship is going to be to God and build others up. That's the goal, right? Verse 27. If anyone speaks in a tongue, 2 or 3 at most should speak one at a time, and someone must interpret. If anyone speaks in a tongue, so that first word, if, reminds us that it's not mandatory that someone speak in tongues, but if someone does, there's got to be an interpretation. So he says 2 or 3 at most should speak one at a time, and someone must interpret. So he doesn't want tongues to dominate their worship services. He wants maybe 2 or 3 people to speak in tongues, but what if there's more? What if there's 10 people who can speak in tongues? Paul's saying no, 2 or 3 at most is all that we should be seeing, one at a time, and someone must interpret. So, the principle that we can just derive from that is that some limitations are good. And we're going to see why that is as we move down in the text. 2 or 3 at most should speak one at a time, and someone must interpret. Just want to make that super clear. That's a healthy usage of tongues, is that there is an interpreter there. Paul gives us the second if. If there is no interpreter, we'll supply the then the speaker should keep quiet at church and speak to himself and to God. If there's no interpreter, then the speaker, and here it's the one who wants to speak in tongues, should keep quiet in the church and speak to himself and God. So again, tongues is not a mandatory part of any worship service, but if it is going to be there must be an interpreter. So if you're walking into a church and there's tongues and there's no interpreter, you know that they're in some way there's a misunderstanding or a misapplication of tongues. That's the only healthy way to do it. And I'll be honest, in all my time in the church, I've heard of one church that has interpreters for tongues. They're doing it right, and I pray that if there are people who are speaking in tongues, pray, and they're listening to this, pray that you may interpret. Pray that you'd understand somebody else as they speak in tongues. And that would be a really cool thing to have at Westside Church. I'd be jazzed. Here we go. Next, the 6th element of worship that Paul mentions is that 2 or 3 prophets should speak, and the others should weigh carefully what is said. So we'll just take this first part right here. The idea here is 2 or 3 prophets speaking at one time. Not like all together at the exact same time, but let 2 or 3 prophecies go by, and the others should weigh carefully. That is to examine what is said. So what is said is whatever those 2 or 3 prophets have just spoken. So the reason that 2 or 3 prophets should speak, he's not saying here that that's the max number of prophets, as we'll see in a little bit. He's saying at one time, and the reason we know that is because that's really all you can manage to weigh carefully. If 7 prophets speak, you're not going to be able to weigh carefully what's been said. 2 or 3 is kind of the most that anybody can manage before weighing carefully what is said. Many people will point to Deuteronomy, I think it's 18, where they talk about stoning false prophets and say, if the prophet speaks falsely, we have to kill him. And what's really important is that you understand the difference between how God used the prophet in the Old Testament and how he uses the prophets in the New Testament. In the Old Testament, the prophet sat in the seat of Moses. The people were terrified to speak to God, and so they said, someone go talk to God for us. Someone be God's mouthpiece for us. We don't want to hear from God. And so God said, well, because of that, I'm going to give you a prophet. Go read Deuteronomy 18. Now, in the New Testament, the prophets, as we're going to see, are really the primary givers of the word. I want you to notice something here. Prophecy, I'm going to highlight this in blue, is going to be bringing God's word to the people. A word of instruction is going to be bringing God's word to the people. A revelation is going to be bringing God's word to the people. And a tongue or an interpretation is going to be bringing God's word to the people. And these are all in context where there is no Bible, right? People don't have Bibles. The New Testament hasn't been written yet. How are they going to receive the word of the Lord? Through, primarily, as we see here, prophecy. Paul's seeing like one word of instruction, a revelation, a tongue or interpretation, max 2 or 3. But as we're going to see here with prophets, he says, for you can all prophesy in turn so that everyone may be instructed and encouraged. Prophecy was the main means of getting the word into the hearts of the people, right? And so it's not, in the Old Testament, they're speaking for God, but in the New Testament, yes, they're speaking to God, but they're also the primary givers of God's word in a place, in a context where there is no Bible for people to use. Which means that it needs to be dealt with differently. It doesn't mean you stone everybody who gets a prophecy wrong. It means that the others need to weigh carefully what is said. So the prophet speaks, or a couple prophets speak, and then as a group, they're examining what's been said, and if it's true, if it's right, if it's from the Lord, accept it. And if it's false, just reject it. And that's what was supposed to happen. Now, imagine that this is taking place, and one of these prophets just keeps going and going and going and going, kind of like I do on Sunday morning. And if a revelation comes to someone who is sitting down, the first speaker should stop. We could imagine there would be scenarios where, in the church, people want to bring all the attention to themselves or just keep talking. And, right, God's like, okay, I'm going to let somebody else speak. He gives a revelation to someone who's sitting down. The first speaker should stop. So up here we saw some limitations are good. Again, down here we're seeing some limitations are good. And we'll see why at the end of this. So this next section that we're in right now is about prophecy. How to do it, right? And he says, for you can all prophesy in turn so that everyone may be instructed and encouraged. Remember that Joel 2 talks about prophecy being poured out on all people. Sons, daughters, slaves, they're going to prophesy. They're going to have a word. And so Paul's expectation is that everyone who can say, God's really, I feel like telling me to tell you guys, flee sexual immorality, right? And then the next guy goes up and says, yeah, you know what? And reminder just that if you look at a woman lustfully, you've committed adultery in your heart. And, each person goes in turn, right? That everyone may be instructed and encouraged, right? So they're saying, I think God has put this on me. And, maybe 3 people might go. And they might all have the same kind of word from the Lord about sexual sin. And then everybody else is going to weigh carefully what's been said and say, you know what, that's true. That lines up with Scripture, and so we've got to do that. But then maybe somebody else comes up and they say, well, the Lord's been telling me to tell you guys that you need to give 15% of your money to the Lord, right? And then they would weigh that carefully and say, well, you know what? God actually wants us to be cheerful givers. He hasn't given us a specific number. We don't think that's come from the Lord, right? So it's a totally different worship service where the body is bringing things that they believe that they have come from God, but they have to weigh that because not everything really has come from God. Some of that's just coming from someone's heart, someone's own feelings on the matter. And that's clear, right? Especially in the last part, the spirits of the prophets are subject to the control of prophets, right? Prophecy isn't this avatar moment where God takes your body over and you just become a vessel. The spirits of prophets are subject to the control of prophets, right? So the Holy Spirit is in the prophet. That prophet still has control over their own soul, over their own mouth, right? For, here we go, God is not a God of disorder, but of peace. So that's why some limitations are good. We want to bring limitations into worship if they promote peace. And we want to avoid things that promote disorder, right? So, you won't see us try to implement this in a worship service of 100 or 200 or 300 or 400 people, because it's not good. It's going to create disorder. It won't be peaceful. But in your life group, man, why not? This should happen. How cool would it be if we just took it seriously, go into life group, believe that God would put a song on our heart for us to sing as a life group, believe that God would give a word of instruction or a revelation or a tongue or a prophecy, a word for the group so that they could be edified and instructed and encouraged and built up. Paul's expectation for worship is not that we come and just receive and receive and receive. Paul's expectation for worship is that we come and as we worship the Lord, we build one another up in the power of the Spirit. And there are all these gifts that God has given in order to make that happen. So this is just one example of what it could look like. May you just pray and pursue the Lord and figure out what He is calling you to do to worship Him. Worship Him and build the body. All right, there you guys have it.